I was polishing my dress shoes when my phone buzzed on the bedside table. I almost didn't answer it. The taxi was coming in 40 minutes, and I still had to find the tie Eleanor gave me for my 65th birthday, the navy one with the small white dots that she said made me look distinguished. I remember thinking that was the nicest thing anyone had said to me in years. But I picked up the phone anyway. Old habit. Mr. Drummond? This is Paulette Crane. I'm a solicitor with Hargreaves and Associates in the city. I'm sorry to call on a Saturday, and I understand it's your son's engagement party today, but I really do need to speak with you. It's quite urgent. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I'd never heard of Paulette Crane. I'd never heard of Hargreaves and Associates. How did you get this number? I asked. Your financial institution flagged some activity on accounts associated with your name. They referred the matter to us. Mr. Drummond, I don't want to alarm you over the phone, but I would strongly recommend we meet before you attend any family event today. What I've found, it changes things. I want to tell you that I knew immediately what she meant, that some instinct fired, some old gut feeling that had kept me upright through 40 years of running a small manufacturing business in the outer suburbs of Melbourne. But honestly, my first thought was that it was a scam. Some voice phishing operation targeting retirees. I'd read about those. I'll need to verify who you are, I said. Of course, she said. Please look up Hargreaves and Associates in the white pages. Call the main number. Ask for me. I'll be waiting. I did exactly that. I found the firm. I called the number. The receptionist put me through to Paulette Crane in under 30 seconds. Thank you for checking, she said without any irritation. I'd have thought less of you if you hadn't. That's when I knew it was real. Her office was in a modest building near Flinders Lane. The kind of place that doesn't try to impress you with the lobby. Paulette Crane was a woman in her early 50s with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and a manner that reminded me of my accountant, precise, calm, and not particularly interested in softening a blow. She had a folder open on her desk when I sat down. She turned it around so I could see. These are transactions from a superannuation account and 2 investment accounts registered in your name, she said. Over the past 14 months, a total of $412,000 has been moved, not withdrawn in a way that would trigger immediate alerts, done carefully, in smaller amounts, across multiple institutions. I looked at the numbers. I looked at the dates. I didn't authorize these, I said. No, she said. I didn't think so. She slid another page across. It was a photocopy of a signature. My name, in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't quite right. The loop on the G, in Geoffrey, slightly too wide. The tail on the D, in Drummond, curling where mine never does. These signatures were used to authorize the transfers, she said. We've had a forensic document examiner look at 3 of them. They're not your hand. I stared at that signature for a long time. I want to describe what I felt in that moment, but I'm not sure there are clean words for it. It wasn't shock, exactly. It was more like the world quietly rearranging itself around me, shifting everything 2 inches to the left, and me standing there trying to remember where I'd put my footing. Do you know who did this? I asked, even though part of me already understood. Paulette Crane looked at me steadily. The authorization documents were lodged through a financial planning practice. The practice is run by a man named Rodney Cosford. She paused. Is that name familiar to you? Rodney. My son's business partner. My son, who had introduced me to Rodney 3 years ago as the smartest money man he'd ever met. My son, who had sat at my kitchen table and convinced me to consolidate my retirement savings into a new structure for tax efficiency, he'd explained, drawing little diagrams on a notepad. My son, who had brought Rodney to Christmas dinner. My son, whose engagement party I was supposed to attend in 4 hours. Yes, I said. That name is familiar to me. I should tell you a bit about my son. because none of this makes sense without understanding who I believed he was. His name is Fletcher. Fletcher Geoffrey Drummond. He was born when I was 31, when Eleanor and I were still living in the house in Frankston that we rented for 8 years before we could afford to buy. Eleanor had a difficult labor 31 hours, and when the nurse finally put him in my arms, I remember thinking I had never held anything so catastrophically important in my life. He was a bright kid, curious, always taking things apart to see how they worked, which drove his mother mad because he wasn't always good at putting them back together. He did well enough at school. Not brilliantly, but he had a kind of easy confidence that served him better than grades. People liked Fletcher. He walked into rooms, and rooms responded. I paid for his business degree, then the postgraduate certificate, then the apartment in South Yarra when he was getting started. I gave him a significant sum when he and his partner Cassandra decided to launch their consultancy together. I didn't keep a ledger. He was my son. Eleanor died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Very fast once it started, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Fletcher was attentive during those weeks. He came to the hospital every day. He held his mother's hand. When it was over, he was the one who helped me with the paperwork, the funeral arrangements, the calls that needed to be made. I was grateful. I told him so. 6 months after Eleanor died, Fletcher introduced me to Rodney Cosford. I want to be clear. I was 63 years old. I had run a business for 4 decades. I was not a naive man, but I was a grieving one. And grief does something particular to a person's defenses. It doesn't weaken them, exactly. It just redirects your attention. You're watching inward while someone moves the furniture outward. Rodney was polished and confident and spoke about financial structures in a way that made complexity sound like common sense. He presented documents. I read them, I want to say that clearly, because I know what you're thinking, and you're partly right. But I did read them. I just didn't have them independently reviewed. That was my mistake. One of them, I signed. I consolidated. I trusted. Back in Paulette Crane's office, she explained what she believed had happened. Rodney Cosford had set up a structure that gave him signature authority over certain administrative transactions, buried in the fine print of a document I'd signed early on. That authority had then been used and exceeded to move funds into accounts that fed back, eventually, to a company in which Fletcher held a significant interest. Can you prove Fletcher knew? I asked. The money trail is not straightforward, she said carefully. But it leads where it leads. The company received substantial funds. Your son is a director. Whether he directed Cosford or simply benefited and said nothing, that's a question for investigators. What I can tell you is that the signature authority was not sufficient to authorize the scale of transactions that occurred. This was done deliberately, and someone beyond Rodney Cosford had to know your financial situation in enough detail to identify exactly which accounts to access. Only 2 people had that detail. One was Rodney Cosford, the other was Fletcher. She asked me what I wanted to do. That's a question that sounds simple and isn't. Because what I wanted, what I still wanted, sitting in that chair with the folder of evidence in front of me, was for there to be an explanation. Some other version of the story where Fletcher hadn't done this, where Rodney had acted alone and Fletcher was as surprised as I was. I know that sounds like weakness. Maybe it is. But he was my son. He was the last person left who shared any memory of Eleanor with me. Paulette Crane didn't rush me. She waited. I'd like to understand the full picture before I act, I said. Can you keep gathering documentation? Yes. But I'd encourage you not to wait too long. The longer this continues, the more complex the recovery becomes. I'm not going to do nothing, I said. I just need a day. She looked at me. Not unkindly. Go to the party if you need to, she said. See what you see. But don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And if anyone mentions finances or investments or any kind of document, leave the room. I thanked her. I went back to my car and sat in it for 20 minutes without starting the engine. Then I found the navy tie in my jacket pocket, where I'd apparently put it that morning and forgotten. And I drove to the party. The engagement party was at a function room in a hotel in the CBD. Cassandra Fletcher's fiancé had organized it carefully. She was a pleasant woman with a good career of her own and a large, loud family from Geelong who filled the room with a kind of easy warmth I found myself grateful for. I had always liked Cassandra. This was not her doing. Fletcher met me at the door. He shook my hand. He'd always been a handshaker with me, even as an adult, which I used to find a little formal, but had come to accept as just his manner. "You look good, Dad," he said. "You too, mate," I said. And that was the thing. He did look good. He was relaxed and well-dressed and smiling, and when he looked at me there was nothing in his face that suggested anything other than a man pleased to see his father at his engagement party. I searched his eyes for something: guilt, unease, a flicker of calculation, and I found nothing. Either he was very good at this, or he had genuinely compartmentalized what he'd done to a degree I couldn't fathom. Both possibilities frightened me. I moved through the room. I talked to Cassandra's parents, who were good people with rough hands and easy laughs. I talked to a few of Fletcher's friends I'd met over the years. Young men in their 30s who talked about property prices and football and still called me Mr. Drummond no matter how many times I said Geoffrey was fine. I ate a small plate of food that I tasted nothing of, and I watched my son. I watched him work the room with that easy confidence I'd always admired in him. I watched him put his arm around Cassandra and pull her close in the way that looks effortless when two people actually fit together. I watched him laugh at someone's joke and top up someone's glass and lean down to talk to a child at knee level with genuine patience. I watched all of this, and I tried to square it with the signature in Paulette Crane's folder that was almost my handwriting, but not quite. I couldn't. He gave a speech. Of course he did. Fletcher had always been good at speeches. He thanked Cassandra's family. He thanked his friends. He talked about his late mother with enough restraint to be moving rather than maudlin. He said she had taught him what it meant to be loyal to someone, and that he intended to carry that forward. I was sitting near the back. An older man beside me touched my arm gently and said, "You must be very proud." "Yes," I said. "Because what else do you say?" Fletcher turned to look at me then, as though he felt the conversation happen. He smiled at me across the room, a genuine smile, the smile I'd known his whole life. "And my dad," he said, "who is the most decent man I know." "Cheers, Dad." Glasses went up around the room. People looked at me warmly. I raised my glass. I smiled back. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't affected by it. I was. Right in the chest. That old place where love and loss live so close together you can't always tell them apart. But I kept thinking about that signature. The G with the loop too wide. The D that curled wrong. He'd forged my hand. He'd looked at my signature enough times to try to reproduce it. And he'd almost gotten it right. How many times had he practiced? When had he decided? I drove home that night feeling older than I had felt in years. The next 3 weeks were the quietest work I've ever done. Paulette Crane referred me to a second firm that specialized in financial fraud recovery. I met with a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit who had a manner so mild and careful that he reminded me of a doctor delivering a diagnosis he'd given many times before. I changed passwords. I froze accounts. I had my mail redirected. I did not call Fletcher. He called me twice during those weeks. Once to say he hoped I'd enjoyed the party. Once to ask if I'd looked at the documents Rodney had sent some refinancing proposal, apparently, that Rodney thought would be beneficial. I told Fletcher I'd been a bit under the weather and would look at things once I was feeling better. He said to take my time. No rush. No rush. I lay awake at night and turned that phrase over and over. The investigators confirmed what Paulette had found. and added to it. Rodney Cosford had not acted alone. There were text messages recovered through the financial institution's legal process, in which Fletcher discussed specific accounts, specific timing, specific figures, not in language that would be obvious to a casual reader, but obvious enough. Once you knew what you were looking at, there was a message sent from Fletcher's number to Rodney's 14 months ago. The old super account has the most in it. Best to start there. 14 months ago. He'd been planning this for 14 months. He had sat across from me at Christmas and helped me clear the dishes and shown me photographs from a holiday he and Cassandra had taken. And all along, he had already started. The meeting happened on a Tuesday morning, in a conference room at the investigator's office. Fletcher arrived, not knowing what he was walking into. I had told him, through an intermediary, that there was a matter relating to my estate, planning that I needed his input on, and that I'd like him to bring Rodney. Both of them came. When they walked into the room and saw the investigator, and the lawyer, and me, I watched Fletcher's face very carefully. He recovered quickly. He was always good at that. But for just a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3 something, crossed his face that I recognized. Not guilt. Exactly. Not shame. It was more like the expression of a man who had been running a calculation in his head for a very long time and had just been told the calculation was wrong. Rodney, for his part, went pale immediately. The investigator presented the documentation. He spoke for about 20 minutes in that measured, unhurried way of his. The signatures, the transactions, the company structure, the text messages. Fletcher said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I'd like to speak to a lawyer." "That's your right," the investigator said. "Not you," Fletcher said, looking at Paulette Crane. "My own lawyer." "Of course," she said. He looked at me once before he left the room. I've thought about that look many times since. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't pleading. It was something in between, like he was trying to find a version of events where this was still recoverable. And slowly realizing he couldn't, I looked back at him steadily. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would have mattered in that room, in that moment. Everything that needed saying was already in the folder on the table. Rodney Cosford cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced penalty. He provided records, communications, a full account of how the structure had been designed. Fletcher's legal position deteriorated rapidly once those records were handed over. The recovery process took 11 months in total. Not all of the money came back. Some of it had been moved in ways that were genuinely difficult to trace, and I've had to accept that a portion of what I lost is simply gone. But the majority was recovered. The legal process is ongoing, though I'm told it's unlikely to proceed to a full trial. The evidence is such that Fletcher's lawyers are negotiating terms. I had one conversation with Fletcher, about 3 months into the legal process. He called me from a number I didn't recognize, and I answered by accident. He said, "Dad, I just want you to know that And then he stopped. I waited. The silence went on long enough that I thought he'd hung up. "I don't know how I got here," he finally said. It wasn't a justification. It was just a statement. The most honest thing I'd heard from him in a long time. "I don't know either, mate," I said. I hung up after that. Not in anger. Just because there wasn't anywhere for the conversation to go. I still live in the same house in Frankston. The garden has gotten better. Actually, I've had more time for it since I retired properly. And Eleanor always wanted more roses along the back fence, so I've been working on that slowly. I see Cassandra occasionally. We had coffee once, a few months after everything came out. She was angry not at me, at Fletcher. And underneath that, at herself for not having seen it. I told her she shouldn't carry that. It's very easy, from the outside, to say you would have known. From the inside, when someone is working hard to make sure you don't see something, it's much harder. She's doing well now. She's building her life. I think about Eleanor often. I think she would have been devastated by all of this. She loved Fletcher with the particular ferocity that mothers save for their sons, and she would have been gutted to learn what he'd become. But I also think she was a practical woman, and a fair one. And she would have wanted me to protect what we spent our lives building together. I'd like to believe I did that. Imperfectly. And too late to prevent it all. But eventually, I've been asked by a few people what I would tell someone who finds themselves in a situation like mine. The honest answer is that I'm still working out what I'd tell myself. Looking back, but here is what I know now. In a way I didn't fully understand before, love for a child does not require you to abandon your own judgment. You can love someone completely and still verify what they tell you. You can trust someone and still have independent eyes on documents that affect your financial security. These two things are not contradictions. They are just maturity. Wisdom that I should have found earlier. Do not let grief make your decisions for you. When Eleanor died, I was vulnerable in ways I couldn't see clearly at the time, and I made choices during that window that I would not have made when I was thinking straight. This is not self-reproach, it is just a fact about human beings that is worth knowing. The year after a significant loss is not the time to restructure your finances. Read everything. Read it slowly. Then have someone else read it, someone with no stake in the outcome. No relationship to the people involved. A second pair of eyes on a document costs very little. The alternative, in my case, cost rather more. And perhaps most importantly, if something doesn't sit right in your chest, if there's a small voice under all the noise of family and love and obligation telling you to ask one more question, listen to it. I had moments, in those early conversations with Rodney, where something felt slightly off register. I talked myself out of it because I didn't want to insult my son by doubting his friend. I wish I had insulted him. The insult would have been worth it. Fletcher is my son. That hasn't changed. And I don't think it will. I don't know what our relationship looks like from here. That's an honest answer. And I think the only honest answer I have right now. Some days I think there might be a version of us that survives this. Some years down the track, when there's been enough time and enough accountability. Other days I think the distance is simply too far, but I have the roses along the back fence. I have the house. Eleanor and I made into a home. I have my health, more or less, and my integrity fully. That's not nothing. On the hard days, it's quite a lot. And if you're an older person watching this, with adult children managing parts of your life that feel complicated to oversee, please, just check. Not because your family is untrustworthy, but because checking is simply good stewardship of the life you've worked for. You earned the right to be careful with what's yours. I've had a lot of time to think about how things unfold. Not in a fatalistic way. I'm not someone who believes the universe is tidying up after us, sorting the good from the bad with some invisible hand. But I do believe that the choices a person makes accumulate. They build a structure. Invisible at first. And eventually that structure becomes the life you're standing inside. Fletcher built his. I was part of building mine. And Paulette Crane, on a Saturday morning, when she could have waited until Monday, made a choice to pick up the phone. That call changed everything. But it only reached me because I answered. And I only had anything left to recover because, years earlier, I had worked hard and kept records, and not spent what I hadn't earned. The outcome wasn't luck. It was the result of 100 small decisions made over decades, finally mattering in a moment I hadn't seen coming. I think about the version of myself that didn't answer that call. That went to the party oblivious, signed whatever Rodney sent across in the weeks that followed. Let the structure quietly drain until there was nothing left to find. That version of me is not hard to imagine. It nearly happened. The difference between that version and this one is a phone call I almost didn't take. What I've come to understand slowly, and not without some bitterness along the way, is that intelligence without honesty is just cleverness. And cleverness without conscience eventually turns on itself. Fletcher was a smart man. He understood financial structures and people and timing. He used all of that understanding to build something that was, at its core, a lie. And the lie required constant maintenance. It required him to look me in the eye at Christmas and perform the role of a devoted son, while simultaneously treating me as a resource to be managed. That kind of sustained dishonesty has a cost. I don't know what that cost will look like for him over the years ahead, but I know it won't be nothing. I've also had to be honest with myself about my own part in this. Not the part where I was defrauded that wasn't my fault, and I've worked hard not to carry it as though it were, but the part where I let grief make me careless, where I allowed the weight of losing Eleanor to soften the edges of my judgment at exactly the moment someone was looking for soft edges. That's not weakness to be ashamed of, it's human, but it's worth naming clearly, because naming it is the only way to learn from it. Resilience, I've found, is not about not being hurt. It's about what you do with the hurt, once you've sat with it long enough to see it clearly. I was hurt by what Fletcher did. I still am. In the way that a structural crack in a wall is still there, even after you've filled it in. You know where it is. You check it occasionally. It doesn't bring the house down, but you don't forget it either. What I refused to let happen was for that hurt to become the whole story. I have a garden that needed tending. I have a house that Eleanor and I built together over 40 years. I have a life that is still mine to shape. If you're older and you're watching this, and there's something in your own situation that has been nagging at you, some arrangement that felt a little off, some document you signed without quite reading, some account you haven't checked in a while, please don't let the discomfort of asking the question stop you from asking it. The discomfort passes. The consequences of not asking can last much longer. You've spent your life building what you have. You're allowed to protect it.